Cornwall is a place of mystery, a mystic ancient land with a beautiful coastline, dramatic landscapes, and numerous ghosts. Tales of hauntings are rife across the county. Stories of silent figures and mysterious activity stretch across its rugged coastline and sweeping beaches, its colourful towns and mysterious moors. It seems the ghosts of Cornwall are varied, from phantom hounds to murdered monks, from drowned old sea dogs to brutal smugglers. Is this why many believe Cornwall to be England's most haunted county? There are many myths and legends about the great houses of Cornwall, and none appear to be more haunted than Pengersick Castle. Located between Penzance and Helston on the south coast of Cornwall, the fortified manor house we see today was built around 1510 by William Worth, a wealthy landowner from Devon, although there is evidence the site has been occupied since the 13th century. This property has a violent past. It has a long association with witchcraft, black magic, murder, smuggling and death. Over the centuries, fragments of history are retold and embellished, becoming increasingly bizarre and mystical. But who haunts this unusual location? The ownership of the castle has changed hands many times, and its strategic location and links to smuggling may explain why the property is so haunted. The castle took its name from Henry de Pengersick, a violent and formidable man who constructed the first defended house on the site. The family lived at Pengersick until they suffered greatly in the plague of the 1400s. Henry had a turbulent relationship with the church at that time. It is said that a monk from Gloucestershire's Hales Abbey met his death at the hands of Henry Pengersick because he dared to ask Henry for the land rent he owed to the Duke of Cornwall. He also attacked and wounded the Vicar of Brieg, for which he was excommunicated from the church in 1335. A cowled figure wearing a black robe and a wide-brimmed hat, thought to be a monk, was witnessed by a neighbour who observed him walking through a wall in the grounds. He has been seen many times, and some have heard him praying and chanting. Is this the monk murdered by Henry centuries ago? Henry chose the beautiful Engrina Godolphin as his bride, the daughter of the wealthy adjoining landowners. His violent outbursts may have taken their toll on Engrina, whose apparition dressed in white is seen by many standing near the door in the main chamber. The haunted bedchamber is home to at least 2 other spirits. In the early hours of the morning, guests have woken to see the startling apparition of a ghostly woman staring out of the window. She wears a long-sleeved, patterned nightgown. After a few minutes gazing out towards the coast, she turns, walks slowly towards the Jacobean 4-poster bed, where she lies down and begins to clutch her stomach and writhe in agony. Shortly after, she fades away. Then another female apparition appears. She comes through the wall and stands next to the bedside. Dressed in a black 3/4 length coat over a cream-coloured dress, many believe this is the maid who nursed the ill lady through her final agonising hours. In 1997, an investigation was carried out by the Ghost Club, and during the course of the night, 7 of the 10 participants witnessed 2 ghostly female figures. The other 3 investigators were positioned in such a way that they did not have the same view of the haunted bedchamber. In time, the castle passed to the Millerton family, who had several generations of children here. One of the apparitions said to haunt the castle is that of John Millerton, who came into possession of the castle in the 1520s. He allegedly murdered a man in cold blood in London and fled to the castle to escape justice. For a castle of this time and location, the builders took the defences seriously. With its lengthy coastline, Cornwall was vulnerable to foreign attack, but many believe that the castle was fortified for a different reason: smuggling. For decades, smuggling in Cornwall was an essential part of a vast underground economy that affected entire communities. Men, women and children were, if not directly involved in bringing in the contraband, complicit in the storage, sale and distribution of the goods. Alongside fishing, farming and mining, smuggling was, for some time, one of the main occupations for many in this part of the West Country. Tales of clergymen, mayors and magistrates being complicit were not unusual. Most smugglers used free trade, as it was known, as a way of supplementing their meagre and often unreliable incomes. Vast networks of tunnels were created, cross-country transport routes were established to move goods, and with Cornwall's remoteness from central government, smuggling, whilst dangerous, became a slick operation. On the 15th of January 1527, the Portuguese ship St Anthony foundered in Gunwallow Bay, en route from Lisbon to Antwerp. St Anthony was the personal property of King John III of Portugal and the flagship of his fleet. She was a carrack. These were the largest ships of the time and the first truly ocean-going vessels. The cargo was particularly valuable, estimated to be worth around £4 million today, and included vast quantities of copper and silver. The ship sank in a storm, described in contemporary evidence as a great and urgent tempest of winds and weather, and by the great outrages of the sea. There were 45 survivors from a crew of 86. On the morning after the wreck, the winds receded, and at low tide the wreck was in just 6 feet of water. Both the survivors and the local people attempted to salvage property from the wreck, and by midday there was virtually none left. King John of Portugal demanded his cargo back, and John Millerton, William Godolphin, and another wealthy landowner were all named in a legal case, as they would have been responsible for law enforcement at that time. Coincidentally, all three landowners carried out significant and costly building work on their homes not long after the wreck. Raids on Cornish homes were carried out, but little cargo was found. Some believe much of this cargo is buried in and around the grounds and structure of Pengersick Castle to this day, and this is why, on dark stormy nights, lanterns are seen, with the shadowy figures of the drowned sailors and smugglers desperately looking for their long-lost, ill-gotten gains. There were underground tunnels between the castle and the local beach, and they were almost certainly used by wreckers and smugglers in days gone by. John Millerton had a reputation for being an evil man who claimed he was an alchemist. It is believed he practiced black magic and alchemy in the tower bedroom, where he turned clay into gold, assisted by his familiars. Searing flames and clouds of smoke reeking of sulphur belched from the top of the tower. Local legend says he owned a magical crystal ball with which he could harness the power of the sun and set alight his enemies' lands if he so wished. He is said to have summoned and captured a demon in the bedroom's fireplace, and that it still remains there today. Some say the demon can shapeshift and take the form of a large black dog with glowing red eyes. Others believe the phantom dog is John Millerton himself. The pungent smell of wet dog accompanies this phantom canine, along with the sounds of claws tapping on the floor. This black entity is said to follow people around, and this apparition is known as the Dark Lord of the castle. But are the stories of black magic designed to scare the curious local God-fearing people, the church, and of course the law, to stay away from this property, to protect its connections with smuggling? John and his wife went on to have a son named William, who became the Sheriff of Cornwall in 1565. He married Honor Godolphin, a daughter of Sir William Godolphin, but he and his wife did not have a happy home life at the castle. Their turbulent relationship was written about by Sabine Baring-Gould in 1899, who stated, "According to local legend, William Millerton lived a cat-and-dog life with his wife Honor. They hated each other with a deadly hate, and at length each resolved that this incompatible union must end. William Millerton said to his wife, 'Honor, we have lived in wretchedness for too long. Let us resolve in a reconciliation, forget the past, and begin a new life.' 'Most certainly do I agree,' said she, 'and,' continued William, 'as a pledge of our reunion, let us have a feast tonight.' So a banquet was spread in Pengersick Castle for them and none others. And when they had well eaten, William said, 'Let us drink to our reunion.' 'I will drink if you will drink,' said she. Then he drained his glass, and after that she drained hers. With a bitter laugh she said, 'William, you have but 3 minutes to live. Your cup was poisoned.' 'And you,' he retorted, 'have but 5, for yours was poisoned also.' 'It is well,' said Honor. 'I am content. I shall have 2 minutes in which to triumph over your dead carcass and spurn it with my foot.' Is the female apparition writhing in agony in the bedroom Honor Godolphin Millerton, who may have met her end by poisoning? The castle comprises of 4 stories, each with a single room leading from the granite spiral staircase. At the top is an open flat roof with sweeping views of Prey Sands. On this rooftop, the apparition of a young girl dressed in red dances happily, and she tries to encourage visitors to do the same. Nobody is certain who she is, but those who attempt to communicate with her say she was 13 when she died in the 1530s. Although the weather was stormy that evening, she slipped and fell against the battlements, but a gust of wind caught her skirt, inflating its many layers in effect and carrying her over to her death. Many guests have felt the sensation of being pushed whilst up on the battlements, along with feeling sick, dizzy and falling. Some guests refuse to go up there altogether. A female figure, thought to be Engrina, has been witnessed stepping out of a wall in the haunted bedroom. She is described as tall, slim, very graceful, and looking for something. She wears a grey or light-coloured floor-length gown, with an ornate belt fastened with a sparkling jewel. But there are more ghosts at Pengersick Castle. The apparition of a woman from the 15th century appears where she lost her life. A man strangled to death is seen kneeling and heard choking near a fireplace, and a little boy around 4 years old tugs visitors' clothing in a playful, mischievous way. Is this why some claim that Pengersick Castle is the most haunted castle in Britain? The old market town of Penzance is the most westerly town in Cornwall and has a long history of shipping and smuggling. Located on Quay Street, close to the harbour, the Dolphin Tavern has been well known to seafarers for nearly 500 years. With its heavy granite walls and low wooden beams, the exact age of the building is unknown, but it is thought to be from the 14th century. This historic and much-loved pub is said to be home to at least 3 ghosts. The Dolphin has a colourful but brutal past. The great Elizabethan naval commander, Sir John Hawkins, used the tavern to recruit and organise a Cornish fleet to tackle the Spanish Armada. It is said that Sir Walter Raleigh smoked his first pipe of tobacco imported from Virginia in the tavern, but the authenticity of this account is unknown. Legend suggests the hanging judge, George Jeffreys, utilised the Dolphin's dining room as a courtroom and turned its cellar into a temporary jail during the bloody assizes. Jeffreys was sent to the West Country in the autumn of 1685 to conduct the trials of captured rebels who'd supported the Duke of Monmouth's unsuccessful attempt to seize the throne of England from James II. The prisoners were reputedly kept in the cellar, and given Jeffreys' brutal reputation, it is likely some met unpleasant ends in the tavern itself. The spot where the pool table sits used to be the hatch for the indoor gallows. In 1834, the Penzance dry dock opened, one of the first of its kind in Europe, bringing more visitors to Penzance than ever before. The tavern benefited from this construction, only metres away from its doors, and catered for travellers, businessmen and dock workers. However, the landlord, Mr. Patch, in 1868 found himself in court for having ladies of the night on the premises. The ghost of an old sea captain is probably the Dolphin's most famous and persistent ghost. He has a weather-beaten face, wears a tricorn hat, a frilly lace shirt, and a coat finished with brass buttons. It is thought that he died in the tavern many centuries ago. A previous landlord's wife witnessed the figure, or George as he is affectionately known, several times shortly after they'd taken ownership of the pub. She was unaware of the Dolphin's haunted reputation. Although the captain appears good-natured enough, many believe he met his death in some unfortunate circumstance within the Dolphin Tavern. Others are convinced this man was hanged for a petty crime. Customers occasionally will ask about the rather imposing old sea dog they see sitting in the bar. When they look again, there's nobody there. Records show that in January 1889, a captain of a schooner from Liverpool named Bertha drowned in the harbour just near the Dolphin Tavern. The captain and his mate stopped for a drink in the pub called the Union Inn before making their way to the Dolphin Tavern, around 80 feet from their vessel. Captain James Stewart returned to the vessel, but the shipmate headed on to another pub. The following morning, the captain was nowhere to be seen. Later that afternoon, Captain Stewart's hat was found by a trawler. Another night passed with no sign of Stewart. Eventually, his body was pulled from the water close to the schooner with grappling irons. There were no marks of violence on his head, but the local press suggested crabs and fish had begun to mar his face and hands. It is likely he fell when walking the narrow ladder-like gangplank with no handrails. A verdict of accidental death was recorded. Does the apparition of Captain Stewart return to a place where he enjoyed one last pint before his death? A number of mysterious goings-on seem to happen at the Dolphin Tavern. Heavy footsteps are heard regularly by both landlords and guests. They are heard clearly marching across the ceiling and sometimes coming down the stairs. They seem to follow a regular path. They begin in the front original part of the inn, pass over the bar and on towards the back of the building, where they disappear. As well as footsteps, people hear strange sounds, as if bulky items are being dragged across a wooden floor. Are these the ghostly echoes of smugglers from many years ago, moving their heavy contraband? We know this tavern had links to smuggling, including its own network of tunnels that are now closed up. People feel they are being watched, have been tapped on their shoulders somewhat forcefully, and heard whispers coming from empty rooms. During repairs a few years ago, a smuggler's hideaway was discovered, along with 2 well-preserved casks of rum. A concealed door was also found in a bedroom that led to a secret room in the roof. One of the strangest happenings is the appearance of imprints on beds, pillows and chairs, particularly in rooms 4 and 5, despite the fact they have been empty and locked. The apparition of a solid-looking young man with striking blonde hair has been seen on more than one occasion. He has been witnessed in the bedrooms, standing and even sitting on the end of the bed when the occupant has awoken. His identity remains a mystery, and when he is spoken to, he simply fades away. One suggestion is that he is the ghost of a man who died in 1873, when he fell in the cellar into a large open space, similar to that of a lift shaft. Others are sure he was killed in a fight. Landlady Mary Clark witnessed the apparition twice in 1 week. He has also been seen in the cellars on many occasions, and staff often think he is a new employee, as his appearance is so solid. The final resident ghost of the Dolphin is a woman in a pale-coloured dress from the Victorian era. This haunting seems to be more recent, with a member of staff seeing the ghost on a Sunday morning in 2000. It was just before the pub opened to serve Sunday lunch. The ghostly female figure materialised from a wall beside the bar and travelled across the pool room, disappearing into the opposite stonework. Nobody knows who she is. It seems the Dolphin Tavern, with its rich history and folklore, is still home to a number of restless souls. One of the National Trust's first listed properties was the old post office in Tintagel, which was acquired in 1903. The stories of Tintagel are known throughout the world due to the legends of King Arthur and the romantic ruins of the nearby castle. The old post office, with its traditional rag slate roof and stone walls, has endured the brutal weather of Cornwall's North Shore and dates back to the 14th century. This small medieval manor stands in the heart of modern Tintagel and is said to be haunted by a resident ghost. By 1841, the parish of Tintagel was generating more than 120 letters a week, and it was decided that the village needed its own post office. The old manor house of Trevenna became the post office in the mid-1840s. In the outside wall at the front of the house is a rare Victorian letter collection box dated 1857. Over the years, the roof has gradually subsided, and for a while there were plans to demolish this property, but thanks to the dedication of one small group of people, the post office was saved. By 1895, almost 50 years after Tennyson wrote his famous poems about the castle, much of old Tintagel was torn down to provide accommodation for tourists and those making Cornwall their second home. Historic postal and telegraph equipment is located behind the counter in the post room, and a Spagnaletti receiver and undulator can be seen on the post room desk today. Kelly Palmer, a custodian at the old post office, spent a lot of time in the old house and once discovered what she believed to be a ghost. She recalls her experience from 2014. The first thing I would do in the morning is come in and switch the lights on. Then I would take off the covers downstairs and the lights would flicker. I did the same upstairs and the lights flashed again. Kelly started to speculate if her daily routine might be disturbing a spirit in the house. She decided to utilise the Spagnaletti undulator to help her discover if the flashing light was indeed a ghostly happening. The Spagnaletti device dates from the 19th century and is an early method of sending messages by what later became known as Morse code. She said, "I monitored the flashes and worked out that the flickering light spelt out the name Nora or Noah. The flickering light would stop just before the post office opened each day to visitors." But that was not the end of the ghostly activity. One day, a visitor came running down the stairs and told Kelly there was an old lady in the bed. She has been seen by a number of visitors. It was shortly after this, when looking into the property's records, that Kelly discovered one of the previous residents of the post office was an elderly lady named Mrs. Noah. Is this an example of electrical interference playing tricks on the living, or is it indeed a message from the deceased employee? What do you think? Cotehele is a fine example of an early Tudor house built of granite and slate stone, constructed between 1485 and 1539. Perched high above the River Tamar, it was home to the Edgecombe family for centuries until it was acquired by the National Trust in 1947. With its huge fireplaces, exquisite Georgian antiques, tapestries and oak furniture, both the house and its extensive gardens are reputedly haunted. An early story dates back to the 1670s, where it seems a resident really did come back from the dead. Richard Edgecombe married Lady Anne Montague in 1671, but in 1675 she died, and a few days later her body was laid to rest in the family's vault. The night after the funeral, a knavish sexton had the audacity to creep into the vault and prise open the coffin. He planned to divest the corpse of its priceless jewellery. As he struggled to remove a wedding ring from one of the lifeless fingers, the body stirred, and in a split second she focused her eyes on him. Letting out a terrified scream, he dropped his lantern and ran for his life. Lady Anne sat bolt upright and realised where she was, took the sexton's lantern and returned to the house. Her family were beyond shock to see her. Lady Anne lived at Cotehele for another 44 years. The area beneath the archway at the entrance of the house is said to be haunted by a man wearing very old-fashioned clothing. He is thought to have been a servant who was murdered during an argument many centuries ago. He had his throat slit by a passer-by who accused him of hiding a felon in the house. The spot where he fell and expired remained forever marked by a bloodstain. This stone has been moved near to a bridge and was eventually painted over. Is this why the figure of a man dressed in 17th century clothing is seen searching under this archway? After the death of the third Earl, Ernest Augustus, in 1861, his widow, Caroline Augusta, decided she would spend her final years at Cotehele. Renovations took place in the East Wing, an area formerly used for storage. Caroline lived in this part of the building for 20 years until her death in November 1881. A number of visitors and members of staff have reported smelling a very sudden, powerful whiff of perfume, particularly in the East Wing. The smell is similar to mixed herbs with lilac flowers. One visitor, completely unaware of the phantom fragrance, reported the strong herbal odour accompanied by the sound of music in the oldest part of the house. Some believe that this is the presence of Caroline, the Dowager Countess, who'd lived comfortably here and in death is reluctant to leave. The music is thought to be linked with the second Earl, who was passionate about music and acting. He authored the musical reminiscences of the Earl of Mount Edgecombe, containing a list of the operas he had heard from 1773 to 1823. This book has often been cited by music specialists concerned with operatic history, from Mozart to Rossini. During the final illness of the 5th Earl of Mount Edgecombe in 1944, a nurse from Tavistock was on duty next to his bed in the East Wing. She witnessed a woman in a white dress walk through the room and out of an opposite door. She took no notice of this and assumed this must be the housekeeper. Hours later, she was introduced to the housekeeper at Cotehele, and noticing she was wearing a black dress, the nurse said, "Have you changed your dress? Earlier when you passed through the Earl's room, surely you were wearing a white dress." The housekeeper was quite clear that she had not changed her dress, and neither had she been near the Earl's bedroom. The nurse looked puzzled, but then the housekeeper said, "Don't worry, you must have seen the ghost." The woman in white is thought to be the Earl's wife, Lady Edith Villiers, who died in 1935, and she's been seen many times. But others believe she is a different person. Some are convinced she is a member of the household domestic staff who tripped and fell down the stairs when trying to follow a stable hand who had apparently made her pregnant. Mrs. Phyllis Julian resided at the property for a number of years. During December 1980, a friend had called with her husband to wish Mrs. Julian the compliments of the season. However, after the visit, the lady asked whether Mrs. Julian had a young girl staying with her, a girl with long hair and wearing a white flowing dress. She and her husband had seen such a girl on the private staircase as they were leaving. No such girl was staying at the house, and nobody of that description was ever identified. The Cornish coast is littered with shipwrecks and lost souls. Numerous dead bodies have washed up on these remote wild shores. For many decades, much of the Cornish coastline was a perilous place for mariners. Smugglers and wreckers would go to extreme lengths to obtain a ship's cargo, particularly of tobacco, alcohol, tea and fine fabrics. At its peak in the 18th century, wrecking also became commonplace. The wreckers would guide a ship with false navigation lights, sometimes tied to horses or donkeys, knowing the ship would crash upon the rocky shore. Once the ship had wrecked, the smugglers would steal the goods and kill any survivors. As they say, dead men tell no tales. The First and Last Inn at Sennen, near Land's End, is ranked as one of the most famous and haunted pubs in Cornwall. The whole village of Sennen was in on the smuggling and wrecking trade and kept the secret from the authorities, who tried desperately to thwart the criminals. The First and Last Inn dates back to the 17th century and has some rather unique apparitions linked to the inn's rather sinister past. Numerous landlords have reported paranormal activity inside the inn. Much of the ghostly activity links to incidents from the early 1800s, when the pub was named the Sennen Inn. In those times, the pub was owned by a wealthy farmer named Dionysius Williams, who made a fortune on the side as the head of a smuggling ring. The tenant and landlord at the inn was Joseph George, along with his wife Annie. Joseph played a fundamental role in landing the contraband cargoes on behalf of Williams. Mr. and Mrs. George fell out with Williams over the profits of a cargo, and they decided not to pay Williams his rent. Enraged, Williams made the decision to evict the pair. In retaliation, Annie betrayed Williams to the authorities, and this resulted in a lengthy imprisonment for Williams. But by turning Williams in, Annie effectively sealed her fate. The locals swore revenge. She paid a high price for violating the Free Trade Fraternity's loyal code of conduct. The locals captured her, brought her to the nearby beach, tied her to a stake, covered her with fishing nets, and left her to be drowned by the incoming tide in what must have been an agonising death. Her dead body was brought back to the First and Last Inn and laid out in the room known as Annie's room to this day. She was buried in an unmarked grave somewhere in the local area, possibly in the adjacent graveyard. But it seems Annie's restless soul hasn't left the First and Last Inn. She still has her room at the inn and doesn't like anyone sleeping in it, which she has made quite clear with new landlords and their pets over the years. People frequently have terrible nightmares of drowning and being covered in fishing nets. People experience the sensation of being pinned down and unable to move. Is this simply due to sleep paralysis? Many would say it is, but doors slam unexpectedly, previously locked windows open, and guests find it difficult to breathe. Areas of the pub become icy cold, people feel they are being watched or followed on the stairs, and some feel an unseen hand grip their forearm. Some have seen a lady dressed in black on the landing, and others have felt a touch of their hair or a sudden chill. In 2004, new landlords Neil and Lynn moved in and decided to make use of the biggest of the 4 bedrooms, despite Lynn feeling uncomfortable about this. That night, Lynn awoke but was unable to move, and her husband was thrashing and screaming. He'd had a nightmare about being trapped inside a large net. Lynn saw a tall, dark figure next to the bed, but couldn't ascertain if it was a man or a woman. On the second night, the room felt icy cold, but on the third night, Lynn witnessed the ghost of Annie, clearly as she entered the room. She described her as standing in the corner, wearing a long dark coat. She had a rather weathered, leather-like face. The following night, Lynn felt the sensation of water rushing across her face and felt she was starting to drown. With the lights turned on, everything returned to normal, but they were absolutely puzzled as to why one of their cats was found in a closed drawer and the other was enclosed in a wardrobe. After this, the couple changed bedrooms, and a few years later, the pub changed hands. Even though long dead, it appears that Annie's restless soul still wishes to claim the bedroom at the first and last inn. St Ives is a seaside town, civil parish and port. In former times, the town was largely dependent on fishing, but the decline in this industry caused a shift in commercial emphasis, and the town is now primarily a populous seaside resort. Tate St Ives is an art gallery exhibiting work by modern British artists with links to the St Ives area. The Tate also took over the management of another museum in the town, the Barbara Hepworth Museum and Sculpture Garden, in 1980, dedicated to the life and work of the renowned St Ives artist. Hepworth purchased the site in 1949 and lived and worked there for 26 years, until her death in a fire on the premises in 1975. The Tate St Ives was built between 1988 and 1993 on the site of an old gasworks and looks over Porthmeor Beach. The gasworks was built in 1835 to provide gas lighting for the town, but it had a turbulent past. It changed hands many times, took out hefty loans of public money, hired and fired workers regularly, paid its managers somewhat excessively, and faced legal challenges over its operations and safety. A man wearing a blue boiler suit has been witnessed in the building by a number of visitors and staff. He appears rather dirty and dishevelled, is wearing a uniform and boots, and appears as a solid figure. When he manifests, people feel an icy cold hand on their shoulder. People have even said hello to him and are somewhat surprised by his rude and ignorant nature. He never says hello back. It is thought that he could be a man who worked and possibly died at the gasworks. Some of his fellow workers have apparently recognised him, as this man was well known for being so scruffy. Some are convinced he was caught in machinery and died. This is quite possible, and local newspapers did sometimes publish details of accidents. With minimal health and safety procedures in place, accidents, falls and fires at gasworks across the country were not uncommon. In 1927, a man named John Stevens Hollow suffered a broken arm when starting up an engine. He survived, but had the incident been fatal, it's possible it would have been kept from public knowledge. A number of fires broke out at the gasworks over the years, and on occasions, the owners of the gasworks would write to the local newspaper to deny reported fires and accidents. Is this dishevelled fellow someone who lost their life working in this hazardous industry many years ago? I hope you enjoyed these stories from the very haunted county of Cornwall. It is such a wonderful place with such absolutely beautiful scenery. And it was extremely difficult to narrow down and select the stories for this video as there were so many. And you may be wondering why I didn't include Jamaica Inn, Bodmin Jail or the Wellington Hotel in Boscastle, and that's because I am probably likely to go and stay in these locations in the future. Let me know if you'd like me to cover some more locations in spooky Cornwall. I've got a few more little ghost stories for you, and then I have some bits and pieces for you to see. If we just go back to Cotehele for a moment, this property has a room named the King Charles Room. It's believed that King Charles I stayed here in 1644, and some people will not step foot in this room. They're convinced that something is not right about the place, and they'll say to the guides, "What happened in here?" Others claim to have seen a man standing in the corner or looking out of the window. So is this the ghost of King Charles I himself? I wonder. Another story from Cotehele links to one of the holiday cottages that the National Trust lets to visitors, which is actually on the premises at Cotehele. And early one Saturday morning, well before the main house had opened, the visitors were walking around the grounds of Cotehele. They walked through the entrance archway, the one where the man was murdered, and they saw the door to the hall open, and they watched a robed figure come out and appear to put down crumbs for the birds. And then it headed back in and shut the door. They figured it was someone in costume, but when they asked the staff once the house was open, they said there wasn't anyone of that description on the staff, and they wouldn't have been able to access the house at that time of day. So I wonder who or what they saw. I was very interested to read about a celebrity's haunted house in Tintagel. Many years ago, I think it may have been 1998, Kate Winslet and her husband at the time bought Castle Minor for £380,000. It's on the cliff and it overlooks the sea, and it was built as an engine room to provide power for the neighbouring Camelot Castle Hotel. When she bought the house, she knew nothing of the ghost, but the owner of the hotel made sure she knew about it so it wouldn't put her off. And the ghost is said to be a man who was the hotel's engineer, and he lived in the cottage and died there in about 1930. And this man has apparently been seen many times walking from the cottage to the hotel as if he's going to work on the pathway there. Well, in the end, Kate and her husband split, and despite spending lots of money on renovations, they never actually moved in, and they sold the property in 2001 to a British person living in America at the time. And then in 2012, Castle Minor was completely destroyed by fire, and the owner of the Camelot Castle Hotel claims that the fire must have been started by the ghost. He told the press, "They say the engineer led a lonely life down at the house and his ghost remained there after his death. Make of that what you will, but the fire is a mystery as there was no electricity down there. It was pouring with rain when the fire started, and we have not seen anyone down there. So whether the ghost heading off to work is still seen, I don't know. And I think the property has been demolished. If you look to the bottom right of this picture, you'll see a sort of alcove with rubble, and I think that's where Castle Minor must have stood in its day." So I have this little postcard from 1953, and it says, "View showing path down the gorge, rather untidy and greenery beaten flat by countless visitors. Hotel much too prominent in the picture." It's like he's using the postcards as a sort of diary, I suppose. And then he's written, I assume it's a him, "Village of Tintagel, not very attractive, except for one very old and well-preserved house." And I'm assuming that that is the old post office. I wonder if he went in there and saw the ghost. So I've got another little ghost story for you, and this one concerns a phantom Druid priest. And he is said to haunt the burial mound in Rillerton, which is just on the eastern flank of Bodmin Moor. And this story is said to go back centuries. A phantom Druid priest would approach travellers when they were on their own on the moor at night. One evening, a wealthy aristocrat had been hunting on the moor and had taken dinner in a tavern. He was a bit worse for wear, but decided to ride across the moor, and as he passed the burial mound, the Druid priest appeared, dressed in robes and holding a gold cup. The man stopped his horse and asked, "How is it that you possess such a valuable cup?" But the Druid didn't speak, he just held out the cup for the man. The rider drank the contents, and as soon as he did, the cup mysteriously refilled itself. He drank the contents again, and still it was never empty. Angrily, the huntsman shouted, "Why are you playing evil tricks on me?" And he threw the contents of the cup over the priest and rode off. And just a few days later, the aristocrat and his horse were found dead in a ravine. Well, the strange thing is that in 1837, the Rillerton Barrow was excavated, and the archaeologists found a skeleton, a bronze dagger, some pottery, and a gold cup known as the Rillerton Gold Cup, which dates to around 1700 BC. and this is stored in the British Museum in London. Spooky. Now, you know me, I love a menu, and I've got one here which is 120 years old. It's a mayoralty banquet for Councillor J.H. Bennett, who became the mayor of Penzance in 1904. This is for James Henry Bennett, who was descended from a well-established shipping and coal broker family. He bought vast quantities of coal from the Ellerbeck Colliery in Lancashire, and he owned 2 steamships to transport the coal down to Penzance, and they owned large premises on the corner of Jew Street for many years. What I really like about this menu is all the splodges of wine or brandy or whatever it is all over them, so they must have been having a good time. Lots of very nice food, I'm sure. Lobster sauce on the turbot, rather impressive. That's quite a grand menu, let's be honest. There's plenty of stuff there to keep your gout going. We've got no less than 13 toasts, including the King, which would have been King Edward VII at the time. I know I have some fans of King Edward VII, and he did visit Penzance in 1902. Apparently the streets were absolutely packed with adoring fans or subjects, I suppose. Queen Alexandra also gets a toast, as do the imperial forces, the mayor, the ex-mayor, the treasurer, the women, all sorts of toasts going on here. So I'm going to take you over to Newquay now to have a look at this postcard which depicts the Headland and Atlantic Hotel. And on the back it says, "Dear Doff, Mother received the carnations this morning and they are lovely, beautifully fresh. She asked me to thank you very much indeed for them. Newquay is a lovely place. Have had a game of tennis and am thoroughly enjoying myself. Cheerio, Marge." And I love that. It just sounds like such an innocent, happy holiday. We all need holidays like that. And this postcard dates back to the 21st of July 1931. And the postcard shows the Atlantic Hotel in Newquay, which was built in 1892, and it's a rather luxurious and grand hotel. And in 1935 they hired Harrods of London to design their cocktail lounge. But they are probably more well known because in 1967 the Beatles spent 3 days at the hotel filming for the Magical Mystery Tour. Apparently Beatlemania absolutely hit Newquay, and everybody wanted to be an extra or be in the film and try and sneak in to be part of this, what must have been revolutionary, I suppose, in terms of culture. And then I have this rather special letter that was dated from the 12th of September 1931 from the Atlantic Hotel in Newquay. And it says, "Dear Madam, I was very glad to receive your letter of the 11th and note that you will be arriving on the 14th by train. The hotel bus will meet you at the station and I feel sure that your stay with us will be most enjoyable. I have reserved you a nice room at 6 guineas per week, inclusive as requested, and now look forward to the pleasure of your arrival, while assuring you of every effort on the part of my staff and myself to give you pleasure and satisfaction during your visit." And I just think what a wonderful letter. We never see anything like this anymore, do we, in the digital age? But what an absolute joy. The total quality management that this hotel must have given its guests is really special and so nostalgic, and I think that's such a lovely letter. And then I've got this little postcard from Penzance from 1980. "Dear Mum and Dad, here we are, almost as far as Land's End. It's been really nice. We've been walking around the cliffs, swimming in the freezing sea, eating cream teas and searching for stone circles on the moor. Back next week. Lots of love, Susan." And I've got to say, that sounds like my kind of holiday, especially the stone circles on the moor. That's my kind of thing. Now, I know there will be people watching this video who have spent time in Cornwall on holidays or have memories of Cornwall being a special place. And in order to capture that nostalgia, I attempted to make some pasties, some Cornish pasties. I did my best. They were actually quite decent. Mr. GC snuffled most of them. But I followed a recipe from Rick Stein. And very good they were too. And it included swede and potatoes. Apparently, that's what you have to have in your Cornish pasties. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please come and find me on Instagram. If you're feeling generous and you'd like to buy me a coffee, you can use the link below. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next video. Take care, guys.